I've completely stopped understanding what's happening in this damn world. On one hand, we have PlayStation, which has released extremely few exclusive games this generation compared to the previous one, and those that do come out almost immediately make their way to PC. Plus, after the Concord failure, Sony canceled most of their service games in development, which means, according to insiders, we shouldn't expect anything worthwhile anytime soon, and the company keeps ripping off gamers by not even including a vertical stand in the package, or charging $800 for the Pro version without including a disk drive. And yet, it's still the best-selling console of the 9th generation. On the other hand, there's Xbox, which offered 2 consoles right at launch, including the Series S, the cheapest option that still runs all modern games. There's Game Pass with several hundred fascinating games, and first-party releases go straight into the subscription, which now includes games like Call of Duty, Bethesda projects, and many others. But despite all this, nobody seems to want an Xbox. This has forced Microsoft to port exclusives to PlayStation, like the recently announced Forza Horizon 5. Basically, each console has plenty of advantages and disadvantages, so the question of which console to choose is more relevant than ever. That's why I decided to break everything down in this video. Enjoy watching. Let's start with the model lineup, since there's quite a variety to choose from. Xbox has the big black box Series X and the small box Series S. They differ not only in size, but also in price. For example, the S version can be bought for $300, which is like wow for a current-gen console. Meanwhile, the X sells for $500 or even $450 without a disk drive, and it also comes in white, though there are even more color options than there are models with increased storage. But the main difference is performance. The bigger box is, accordingly, more powerful than the smaller one. Yet the Series S runs all modern games without major issues, just with slightly worse graphics, and not always. It still hasn't become the bottleneck everyone feared at launch. If developers know what they're doing, they can optimize games even for the Switch, let alone a full-fledged console. Sony also has a couple of options, but while Microsoft went for lower prices, the Japanese went the opposite way by releasing the most powerful console of this generation, the PS5 Pro, which costs $800. Although you can find it cheaper with discounts, since for some reason, there's no rush to buy it at that price. And it doesn't even include a disk drive in the package. For $800, you get a bare console without a drive, which you're supposed to buy separately for $80 or $100 from resellers. This brings the price of a complete set to around 900 greenbacks, or a decent gaming PC without console limitations, with Steam, all games, free online, and much greater functionality. But to keep this video short, you can watch the detailed Pro review on my channel, where I shared my opinion with thorough testing. Otherwise, there's the regular version, divided into 2 models, Fat and Slim. Technically, they're absolutely identical and run games without any differences. The only difference is in size. Fat is bigger, Slim is smaller. Yet the second one costs $50 more, while the Fat can be found for $500. But the main thing isn't even that, but how both camps run games, since that's what consoles were created for. If we exclude the Series S with its simply reduced graphics settings, but it costs less, and the PS5 Pro, which is deliberately more powerful, but at an overprice, then the standard versions run games identically. There are exceptions when developers put extra effort into optimization, but overall this is only noticeable in detailed YouTube comparisons with frame rate analysis, and even then the differences are around 5 to 10 frames. And as I already said, this is usually an exception. Normally the graphics are the same, the detail level is the same, and the games play exactly the same. What's different is the price of games. And here, things have changed dramatically since my last comparison a couple of years ago. Well, let's start with the fact that Microsoft finally acquired Activision Blizzard, despite protests from antitrust authorities. And it seemed like a win. All their games, including the Call of Duty series, are coming to Game Pass, seemingly free stuff. But on the other hand, such huge expenses somehow need to be recouped, which is why Xbox has closed all regional price benefits. If previously you could buy games in Argentina for 50 or even 70% cheaper than the rest of the world, now that loophole has been closed, and you have to buy games at full price. This is compounded by the subscription price increase and the cancellation of the annual Xbox Live Gold, which doesn't allow saving money like before. Compared to PlayStation, where they still haven't implemented region locking, you can buy games cheaper than on Xbox. I never thought I'd say this, but yes, PlayStation is more economical for buying games, especially during sales. So yes, if you're used to buying new releases at launch, PlayStation will definitely be more economical. But if you use subscription services, then Xbox clearly wins. There are still no alternatives to Game Pass. However, there's another important detail, and that's the games themselves, or rather, their availability. Sony has colossal problems with exclusives this generation. Yes, a couple of interesting sequels came out, but as for unique games besides Helldivers, Returnal, and Ratchet and Clank, I can't recall any off the top of my head. and that's after 4 years of the console's existence. There are also games from third-party studios like Silent Hill 2 that don't come to Xbox, but there aren't many of those either compared to the previous generation where at least a couple of good exclusives came out every year. Of course, you can comfort yourself with upcoming releases. From what's been announced, there's Marvel's Wolverine and Ghost of Yoti, but that's not much either. And according to insiders, we shouldn't expect anything major from Sony themselves in the coming years, because the company has been obsessed with service games for the last few years. But after the resounding failure of Concord, they decided to roll everything back and are now canceling other service games. For example, one known to be from the God of War universe, which was being developed by the team behind the Demon's Souls remake. Since Concord was a multi-million-dollar project for which they bought developers who worked on Destiny, Call of Duty, Apex Legends, and even Halo, I mean, people with experience. However, the game was shut down just 2 weeks after release due to little interest from players, and now, according to insiders, the company doesn't know what to do. New IPs might not catch on or pay off, and they don't want to release garbage either as they'd lose their audience, so games aren't coming out. On the other hand, there's Microsoft, which with the acquisition of Activision Blizzard has become the largest game publisher. At the end of last year, they literally bombarded us with top AAA titles every month, from Black Ops 6 to Indiana Jones, which were included in the subscription at launch, just like Stalker 2. And that's not counting Lies of P released earlier and many other games. This year alone, they have 7 releases planned from internal studios. And from third parties, several dozen more that will enter the subscription at launch. So it definitely won't be boring. And with all this, here's the number of PlayStation sales, and here's Xbox. We can already say that PlayStation has clearly won this generation, at least in terms of sales. This explains Microsoft's abandonment of the exclusivity policy for games. Starting this year, all games from Xbox internal studios will also be released on PlayStation. On one hand, this is a strange decision given the amount of quality content that could attract players to their console. On the other hand, it's quite obvious because they need to recoup the money spent on buying Activision Blizzard and other studios somehow. So it turns out that Sony doesn't have that many of their own games, but Microsoft comes to their rescue. Therefore, there will definitely be something to play on PlayStation. Plus, don't forget that PS5 games are cheaper than Xbox thanks to regional prices. But on the other hand, all Microsoft games are included in their subscription at launch, which is only available on Xbox if we're talking about consoles. Obviously, these aren't all the differences, but in my opinion, they're among the key ones. When you decide not which exclusives you want to play, Sony's or Microsoft's, but where you'll be more comfortable, with a subscription or buying each game separately, but cheaper than on Xbox. Although I admit, PlayStation, precisely because of Microsoft's decision to abandon exclusives, now looks more attractive. Because if we push the price issue aside, absolutely all games will now be released on PlayStation. And Xbox is simply turning into a Game Pass station, which still won't get Sony exclusives. Of course, Xbox has many other advantages, normal backward compatibility, including Xbox 360, one of the most charming generations in my opinion. But this will be interesting to nostalgic gamers like me, while newcomers will play new games. We can also mention Quick Resume, a technology that allows storing up to 5 games in memory and launching them from where you left off. For online games, this is useless. I explained why in the full Xbox review. You can check the link below the video. But for single-player games, it's a must-have. I fully appreciated this when playing Stalker 2 at launch, when shader compilation wasn't fixed and the first launch took several minutes. And by the way, an interesting detail, Stalker 2 is not planned to be ported to PS5, but this is more an exception to the rule. And another killer feature of Xbox is native support for VRR and 120Hz. This is an incredibly powerful thing in games with fluctuating frame rates. If you set 120 Hz when the frame rate drops, the picture will feel and play smoother than on PlayStation. And this is really top notch because unfortunately, modern consoles still run games with drops to 40 frames or like Stalker, even 50 at launch. But PlayStation has an absolutely incredible controller with a ton of technologies that allow you to experience games in new ways. In the end, nothing has changed. Ideally, you should have both consoles to get the maximum experience. As each console has its own strengths, PlayStation has literally all games, with Xbox exclusives coming too. Plus, they cost less than on Xbox itself due to regional pricing. Quite the paradox, and Xbox excels thanks to Game Pass. Combined with the Series S, this is simply an overpowered setup, even in 2025. Many people therefore buy a PlayStation for all games and a Series S for Game Pass. The main thing is that Xbox in recent years has transformed from a console holder into one of the largest game publishers. The direction seems the same, but the approach is different. In the first case, it's important to sell as many consoles as possible, while in the second, it's more important to sell more games, regardless of the platform. That's why exclusives are already coming to PlayStation, and in the future will even start coming to Switch. But for us as gamers, this is also a plus, because Microsoft has finally started releasing quality games that come straight to the subscription. So Xbox remains relevant thanks to its subscription, which has no equal so far, and while it hasn't been brought to other platforms besides PC, and probably won't be because it would mean losses for companies like Sony and Nintendo, who earn a percentage from each game sold, but here you buy one subscription and get hundreds of games for free. However, you miss out on Sony exclusives, and other games cost more than on PlayStation. So choose what's more important to you, and I hope I've helped with your choice. And if so, support the video with a like, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next videos.